Chapter 14. It was late on Monday night. Still in shorts and a shirt, Lily lay under her red quilt looking up at the sky. She could see Orion's belt and the W of Cassiopeia. They were sharp and clear among the other stars in the dark sky. It was a beautiful night, and finally she and Albert were going to watch for convoys. She thought about it a little uneasily. They hadn't talked about Lily's going to Europe since that day at the beach. Maybe he had forgotten, she told herself. Or maybe he had thought it over by now and knew she had been lying. She turned in her bed, trying to put it out of her mind. Everything was ready for tonight on the floor. A sweater, 2 towels, her sneakers tucked in on one side of her beach bag, and 2 bottles of soda jammed into the other side. If only Graham would go to sleep. Vaguely she heard Graham's radio, the end of Lux Radio Theater, and then music. Would you like to swing on a star? She couldn't keep her eyes open. Then suddenly she was awake, wide awake. It seemed very late, midnight, maybe 1 o'clock. Graham's radio was off, and all the lights. Lily reached for the screen and pushed it up and out. She dropped into the rowboat and pushed herself along the porches. In the light that spilled out from the sides of Mrs. Colgan's blackout shades, she could see a mess of sand crabs hanging onto the pilings. And at the Orbans, just silence. She sat there, as wide awake as if it were the middle of the morning, so angry with herself for sleeping, so disappointed Albert was asleep, she could have cried. Too much crying, she said aloud. Too much talking to yourself, a voice said, so close she jumped. Albert dropped into the boat. He was clumsy and splashed water in over the side. Because of the cat, he said. She leaned over until she could see the cat's face, its eyes peering out from the front of his open jacket. Cats hate water. This one does not. I thought you would not come. She opened her mouth ready to lie, but raised one shoulder instead. I fell asleep. Albert nodded. It is hard to stay awake sometimes. Lily pushed the boat out from under the porches. Here's what we'll do. We'll cut across the bay. That way we can stay away from the surf. But it is closer the other way. Yes, but it's harder to fight the surf than the bay. If you're going far, you will want to save your arms. He nodded, watching her pull on the oars. Will you teach me to swim? He asked after a while. She blinked. She'd been thinking about Poppy. Poppy on a ship, watching her swim toward him. It was a wonderful dream. Swim, she repeated. Yes, but why can't you swim? I did not have an ocean, he said. Like Margaret in Detroit, she thought. I had a river, the Danube. He leaned forward. It runs between Buda and Pest, but the river is not blue. Like the waltz, it's gray and sometimes silver. Lily didn't say anything. She had never heard of Budapest split up that way in 2 halves. She'd heard of the Blue Danube, though. It was one of those songs in her music book for the piano. It was hard to row now. The marshes were closing in around them, and there was the dry rustle of the reeds hitting the sides of the boat and scraping the bottom. She could see Playland now in back of them on 99th Street, the roller coaster, a dark skeleton, the Ferris wheel rising up behind it. In front, the boardwalk was misty, the tall lights painted black toward the sea, so subs couldn't spot ships in the water nearby. How long, Albert asked. Long? To learn to swim? He leaned forward. I want to go with you to Europe. She opened her mouth. Tell him right now, she told herself. Tell him it's just too far. The water's too rough. Lily, she sighed. You could never learn to swim the Atlantic in a summer. It could take months, years to be good enough, fast enough. If you can do it, I've been swimming since I'm 4, she said. And remember that afternoon when I went into the surf after you? I was nearly swept under. He didn't answer. She took a breath, trying to think of something to convince him. You even said you thought I was a better swimmer. In the dark, she could just see him shaking his head. I know you're a good swimmer, he said slowly. I know you were coming for me. He stopped for a moment. I don't know the word. How could she tell him the truth now? He was the first friend she'd ever made. You couldn't count Margaret, who had been in Rockaway every summer from the time they could walk, from the time they could talk. Albert, a friend, a good friend, Lily's best friend. Teasing is the word, he said. She looked at him. His face was so serious. One hand was in his jacket, petting the sleeping cat. You do not want to take me, he said. You think I will not be able to keep up. No, it's not that, really, she said. You think I'm a coward because of the plane that day. She kept shaking her head. He leaned forward. It was just that I was thinking it was Europe. His lip trembled a bit. Budapest, we had a yellow house with birds. He moved his fingers. They were small birds, blue ones painted on the house, painted on the window shutters. I had an orange cat, too. We called him Paprika after the pepper. He looks like this cat. He tried to smile. And my grandmother, Nagimama, was always telling me to do this and that, like your grandmother. Lily bit her lip, trying to think of what to say. I have only Ruth left. Ruth is my family. He stopped then and pointed. Look! She turned and saw it too. The first ship looked like a flat chunk of coal on the water, so far out she wasn't even sure it was a ship. But then a second one appeared on the horizon, moving out of the mist. It was a huge ship, its top a triangle of turrets and masts. For a moment they didn't say anything. They sat there watching, the rowboat rocking gently until the ship disappeared into the mist again. That was a troop ship, she said at last. Albert leaned back. Yes, he said. I know. I will learn to swim, Lily, to keep up, and we will go out there, out to a ship, and then I will go back to Europe and find Ruth. She began to row again, turning the boat toward the canal, her mouth dry.